honestly, the biggest concern that I have is that every time he does something, he has minions that see it as a dog whistle. And then it only increases the attacks on myself as well as any other.
Stephen A. Smith is in some hot water. The people are really upset at him right now because
what'd he do now?
He made some comments about Jasmine Crockett and the way she expresses herself.
So on October 17, 2025, Stephen A. Smith launched an attack on Representative Jasmine Crockett, but the real target wasn't her rhetoric. It was her investigation. The Texas Congresswoman had just accused Donald Trump's team of engaging in destroying evidence tied to the Epstein files, a claim she made both on the House floor and in a viral interview that left Washington rattled. Within hours, she was trending nationwide for calling out a system that, in her words, protects the powerful at the expense of the public. And that same afternoon, Stephen A. Smith went on his Sirius XM show, Straight Shooter, to call her an impediment who needed to learn how to get things done.
Job to represent a constituency. When you're in the opposition party, the minority party, your job is to object and to be loud, to be a fly in the orbit, to gum up the works. She's doing what it is she has the power to do, what's in her capacity to do, what's in her bandwidth to do.
It wasn't subtle. It wasn't even about politics. The timing was too exact. Crockett had just accused the former president and Attorney General Pam Bondi of covering up Epstein's connections, and Smith, who rarely touches politics unless it's safe, decided this was the hill he wanted to shout from. He fixated on her tone, not her facts. He never mentioned Epstein, the FBI, or the closed-door decision by Speaker Mike Johnson to shut down Congress for 5 weeks to block the vote on releasing the files. Instead, he zeroed in on Crockett's disrespectful style, echoing the same coded criticism that has followed outspoken black women for generations. He never brought up her record on fair housing, maternal health, or gun violence prevention. He just kept talking about tone, civility, and what he called rhetoric for the streets. We've seen this pattern before. Serena Williams, LeBron James, Colin Kaepernick. Each time a black public figure dares to speak with conviction, Stephen A. finds a way to make them the problem. But this time, it wasn't just tone policing, it was political interference. Crockett wasn't talking about basketball or endorsements. She was calling out a former president for obstructing justice in one of the darkest scandals of the century. Smith, armed with a microphone and a multi-million-dollar contract, decided to divert attention. When he told his audience that Crockett's approach was counterproductive, what he left out was that her remarks came after Trump mocked her intelligence on live television, calling her low IQ and wondering if she was related to Davy Crockett. That insult had barely cooled before Smith joined the pile-on.
This is a low IQ person who I can't even believe is a congressperson. Between her and Ilhan Omar and the group. You know, I met the head of Somalia. Did you know that? And I suggested that maybe he'd like to take her back, and he didn't want her. He said, I don't want her. Okay.
But here's where it gets suspicious. His rant aired just 48 hours after Crockett's Epstein allegations began trending. Her interview with the influencer, known as the Jolly Good Ginger, was already dominating political feeds when Smith dropped his so-called critique. He didn't just question her methods, he shifted the entire conversation. Instead of debating whether Trump's team had tampered with evidence, the headlines turned into Stephen A. Smith calls out Jasmine Crockett. The scandal went from a threat to Trump's inner circle to another culture war spectacle, tailor-made for cable panels. And while Smith pretended to be above politics, the House Speaker's office quietly confirmed that the recess blocking the Epstein file vote would begin the same day his clip went live. That coincidence doesn't look much like coincidence anymore.
AOC, look, I think she's very nice, but she's very low IQ, and we really don't need low IQ. Between her and Crockett, we're going to give them both an IQ test to see who comes out best. Now, I took my test. I took a real test at Walter Reed Medical Center, and I aced it. I got every one of all those questions right.
We can't ignore the larger setup. Stephen A. Smith has built his brand on being loud, polarizing, and marketable. But in 2025, he's also become valuable in another way, to the corporate and political alliances shaping the media narrative around Trump's comeback. He's been conspicuously quiet about Project 2025, the plan drafted by Trump allies like Russell Vought to dismantle federal protections and privatize social programs. He hasn't touched Trump's comments about countries, nor has he criticized the administration's crackdown on voting rights. Yet the moment a black woman demands accountability for the Epstein files, Smith suddenly finds his moral compass. That's why Tamika Mallory's reaction hit so hard. Stephen A. Smith's actions are intentional, she said. At what point will you lead the charge to turn him off? It wasn't hyperbole, it was exhaustion. For years, black women in media have watched Smith profit off the same dynamics he claims to challenge. The rhythm is familiar, he provokes outrage, plays the victim, then brings his family on camera to soften the blow. And right on schedule, within days of the Crockett controversy, Smith posted a video featuring his daughter and nephew talking about love and respect. Viewers weren't buying it. Across social platforms, the consensus was brutal. This was an image rehab tour, not a teachable moment.
Talks crazy. So you can't call out Jasmine
right.
For allegedly talking crazy, you know, his words, but not Trump. And I also believe that, Tamika Mallory and Bakari Sellers, they need to have a conversation with Stephen A. They should go on Stephen A's show and explain to him why playing nice with Trump doesn't work.
Behind that image, though, lies something even murkier. Insiders close to his SiriusXM deal claim the network has been courting right-leaning sponsors since early this year. They point to internal pitch decks circulated in February 2025 that highlight Smith's cross-ideological appeal and access to conservative demographics. That's corporate code for political alignment. And the timing lines up. Right when Crockett's Epstein comments started threatening the Trump narrative, Smith's show, bankrolled by sponsors eager to stay in MAGA's good graces, gave those same audiences a convenient new villain. Instead of Trump, it became Jasmine Crockett versus Stephen A. Smith, a safe spectacle that took the heat off everyone else.
Well, since those comments, a ton of people have spoken out against what he's saying and defending Jasmine Crockett. I saw Willie D speak out, Stephen Jackson, Tamika Mallory is calling for people to turn Stephen A. Smith off and treat him and his show like the NFL, and Bakari.
Meanwhile, the backlash kept growing. Angela Rye, Tiffany Cross, and Bakari Sellers each called Smith's comments misogynistic. Former Tallahassee Mayor Andrew Gillum accused him of self-hate. Even Bishop Talbert Swan chimed in, saying Smith never has smoke for Trump, MAGA, or racist police, but always for black women. Their frustration wasn't about ego, it was about pattern recognition. Every time white power structures face accountability, a figure like Smith appears to redirect the conversation back to manners. When the outrage threatens to reach the top, he reminds America to scold the messenger. By October 18, his defensive spiral was in full motion. On his YouTube channel, Smith complained that people were trying to cancel him, insisting, "Bump that, I ain't built that way." He portrayed himself as the underdog even though he remains one of ESPN's most protected figures. He played clips of his original comments as if repetition would make them sound reasonable. And again, no mention of Epstein, no reference to Crockett's legislative record, not even a whisper about the 5-week congressional freeze that conveniently buried her motion. The louder he talked, the clearer it became that silence was the point.
So back to Melania. Look, I think what she's pointing out, one, this is not a new story. This is not a new story.
Right. People have been bringing this up about Melania for a long time.
Yeah. Washington Post has reported on this back several years ago, I believe it was. I think what she's trying to point out here, as the immigration policies right now are under fire and under scrutiny, is the inequity that someone who was, I think, dating Trump at that time, Melania Trump, or they were in a serious relationship, something of that nature, gets this seemingly pass.
We've learned that Crockett didn't respond directly, not with a statement, not with a press release. She didn't have to. Her retweets of Mallory, Rye, and Cross spoke volumes. The pattern was visible. A man with a massive platform uses it to question her intelligence, and a chorus of women uses theirs to call out the game. Crockett knows better than to feed the machine. Every time she claps back, the story becomes her attitude instead of her evidence. So she stayed quiet, kept working, and let Smith's meltdown run its course. Still, this smear worked in one sense. Mainstream coverage of her Epstein comments all but disappeared by week's end. The networks replayed Smith's rants, but rarely mentioned the underlying claim that Trump's allies may be destroying evidence connected to Epstein's files. The term Epstein vanished from the same headlines that once screamed it. What stayed was Stephen A. Smith controversy, a neatly packaged distraction. We can't ignore how convenient that was for everyone whose names might appear in those sealed records.
Yeah, because those guys, there's a dirty secret about these people that are in Congress, and they party, okay? They're regular guys.
Yeah.
And regular women, and they're in their 30s or 40s or whatever they are, and every now and then they do, and they get drunk, and they
Human beings.
Remember that DC madam that had a whole book of people, and then she wound up committing suicide? She said, "I'm not suicidal,"
And while all this unfolded, Smith began echoing talking points that sounded less like sports commentary and more like political PR. On one show, he praised bipartisanship and urged Democrats to work with this man, referring to Trump. That phrase, "work with this man," has been a MAGA talking point for months, used to shame critics who demand accountability. Smith's delivery made it sound like common sense, but to those who track media messaging, it was textbook alignment. Every soundbite made him sound less like a commentator and more like a subcontractor. The shift didn't happen overnight. Since early 2025, Smith's SiriusXM show has been expanding its reach into politics, booking guests from conservative media circles and courting the same advertisers that bankroll far-right podcasts. Several producers who left the show in spring cited editorial direction concerns, according to leaked internal messages reviewed by multiple reporters. One message allegedly described a push to appeal to middle America voters disillusioned by woke politics. That's not exactly a subtle pivot. It's an admission that outrage sells best when it punches down. And let's not forget what Crockett was actually investigating when Smith intervened. Her push to release the Epstein files wasn't just about revisiting a notorious case. It was about transparency in a government that's been caught hiding too much. The files include communications between Epstein and a list of public figures across business, media, and politics. Trump's name, as everyone knows, has surfaced repeatedly in connection to Epstein's social network, from Mar-a-Lago appearances to party photographs. Crockett's statement that evidence might be destroyed wasn't baseless. It was grounded in an observable pattern of obstruction. By attacking her credibility, Smith helped make that investigation easier to ignore.
I'm just guessing. Everybody wants to say he was working for the Mossad. He very well could have been. He could have been working for the CIA. He could have been a guy who was on his own, but also working with them, right? Like a guy that they used, but they never fully endorsed.
Like an asset.
What's even more telling is how Smith framed the debate afterward. He said he was just being honest and that critics were twisting his words, but honesty doesn't usually require this much spin. He claimed he respected Crockett, then spent 40 minutes implying she was naive, ineffective, and too emotional to govern. That's not respect, it's reputation laundering, and the people cheering him on weren't progressives. They were conservative influencers, right-wing pundits, and media figures who usually mocked Smith as a woke liberal. Suddenly, he was their new favorite commentator. That alone should raise eyebrows. Meanwhile, the online reaction got ugly. MAGA accounts flooded Crockett's mentions with racist taunts, while Smith's fans defended him as the victim of cancel culture. The narrative split right down the middle, exactly how divisive politics thrives, and as that storm raged, the Epstein conversation faded further into the background. We have to ask who really benefited from that outcome. Smith's defenders argue that he's just doing commentary, that he's allowed to disagree, but this isn't just disagreement. This is a pattern of targeted deflection that happens to align perfectly with the interests of the people most threatened by Crockett's work. When critics point that out, he waves the cancel culture flag, hoping the noise will drown out the substance. It's a distraction wrapped in indignation.
So Stephen A. Smith has been seeing all of this outrage, and he says, normally he does his show at a certain time every week, but he decided to do an emergency episode to get back with the people who have something to say. So he went on his show, straight
emergency episode,
Straight Shooter with Stephen A.
Insiders say the damage control inside his camp has been frantic. One producer allegedly suggested bringing more family members onto future episodes to humanize Smith's image. That's not speculation. It's part of a known PR playbook. When celebrities face moral backlash, the first step is to show vulnerability. Family photos, tearful confessions, reminders that they're just human. But in Smith's case, it's hard to forget that he chose this fight. He picked the target, picked the timing, and ignored every chance to de-escalate. By now, the story has outgrown sports or politics. It's about credibility. Stephen A. Smith has made a career out of performing authority without challenging power. But when his commentary starts echoing the same script used to smear outspoken women in politics, we have to consider who's writing that script for him. The coincidence of timing, the attack following Crockett's Epstein statement, the congressional shutdown, and his sponsors' rumored demands creates a picture that's too aligned to dismiss as random.
And I had a conversation with Stephen A. And I said that I would be more judicious in the way that I critique the things he said, and I would only do it if it rose to the level of something I needed to say something about.
We can see how the machinery works. A lawmaker raises a question that could shake the system. A media personality with a massive platform redirects attention, turning substance into spectacle. The public argues about tone, decorum, and cancel culture, while the original revelation sinks beneath the noise. It's not new, but this time the stakes are enormous. The Epstein files are the one piece of evidence that could expose networks of influence stretching from politics to media, and Stephen A. Smith, intentionally or not, became the buffer between that truth and the public. So let's ask the obvious. If Stephen A. Smith isn't trying to distract from Epstein, why did he pick this fight at this exact moment with the one woman digging up what Trump once buried?
And so if there is someone that is evidencing themselves, such as the president, who is going out and says, yes, I will take a $400 million plane from a foreign government, or is engaged in receiving crypto that we cannot track in exchange for, say, giving away chips to Saudi Arabia. No, we absolutely need to understand how these things could cause us harm. Or when he's cozying up to somebody like Vladimir Putin, it's not only a problem for us, but it's a problem for our...
The answer might be in what Stephen A. Smith didn't say. While Jasmine Crockett was warning about Trump's team engaging in destroying evidence, pointing to the Mar-a-Lago document raids and the Department of Justice's sudden backpedal on the Epstein client list, Smith was on his SiriusXM show telling listeners that Trump's economic record wasn't all negative. We all heard the clip. His tone softened, almost approving, when he talked about unemployment rates and stock growth under Trump. But when the subject turned to Epstein, to cover-ups, or to the Supreme Court's attacks on black voting rights, he went silent. No outrage, no fire, not even a hint of the sharp-tongued bravado he saves for black athletes or female politicians. When Trump publicly mocked Crockett as low IQ, Smith said nothing. But when she called Trump a piece of trash, suddenly Smith discovered his moral compass and started lecturing about respect and professionalism. It's almost mathematical. The louder Crockett got about Epstein, the quieter Smith got about Trump. And that's not new. He's never once condemned Trump's country's remark, never mentioned Project 2025, a plan designed by Trump allies to strip away voting and civil protections, never criticized the Christian nationalist wave moving through state legislatures. But the second a black woman raises her voice to call out corruption, Smith decides it's time to talk about decorum. The hypocrisy would be laughable. If it weren't so strategic, at this point it's fair to wonder whether this is just ego or whether it's a performance built to distract.
He is provocative. He gets the people going, right? It's all content. Everybody just making content. So it makes for good conversation. Now, as far as what he said about Jasmine Crockett, and me and Stephen A. spoke about this behind the scenes this week, but I don't think any elected official is above critique, but you got to criticize their policy. And it seems like Stephen A. is criticizing her style. And if you are criticizing her style and telling her she needs to change her style to be able to get things done.
Then came another twist. Crockett's allies went public. Angela Rye said Smith's obsession with tone was a mirror of how America has always tried to quiet black women. Bakari Sellers called it betrayal. Willie D said it flat out. Jasmine Crockett ain't the problem. Their message wasn't about one man. It was about a pattern of compliance. But while they were calling him out, Smith was busy crying foul, accusing his critics of cancel culture. He told audiences he was being unfairly targeted, that people were trying to silence his freedom of speech. What he didn't say was that behind the scenes, his bosses at SiriusXM were already in talks with a conservative media group tied to several MAGA funders, the same network that's been lobbying to bury Epstein coverage since the files first reappeared in the headlines this summer.
Yeah, that's what I think too. I don't think there's any evidence to either. I think it's all been, I don't think there was collected with that plea deal, and I don't think there's any list that's going to point to, there's no smoking gun.
I don't know about that.
I think it's all been, taken care of. I think that I think you could open up every file.
But that's the truth. Why did they have all those files? Why did they parade around with these?
We've seen this kind of alignment before. A celebrity commentator becomes the lightning rod, soaking up outrage, so the real story slides under the radar. And this one fits the blueprint too neatly. Insiders close to the SiriusXM negotiations told producers that the potential deal involved a cross-promotional partnership with an outlet that has a direct relationship with right-leaning donors. Translation, money that benefits from controlling the narrative. So while Smith was crying into his mic about cancel culture, the same executives signing his checks were quietly ensuring that audiences kept arguing about him instead of asking who was protecting Epstein's clients. That's the part that sticks with us. We know Smith's a master showman. He's made millions perfecting the art of loud deflection, turning every controversy into his own redemption arc. But this time, the stakes are national. The Epstein files aren't gossip, they're political dynamite, and the people most desperate to suppress them have every reason to keep the media circus spinning somewhere else. What better distraction than a shouting match between one of the biggest names in sports media and one of the loudest new voices in Congress? The formula works every time. Frame it as a feud, call it cancel culture, and let the headlines write themselves.
Jasmine Crockett or somebody like that. Ladies I respect, intelligent women, no doubt. But how a Jasmine Crockett chooses to express herself, I'm like, is that gonna help your district in Texas?
Still, something about this moment feels different. Smith's recent episodes have grown strangely political, talking about fair-minded Republicans, defending free enterprise, and lecturing listeners that extremes on both sides are the real danger. That language doesn't come from nowhere. It's the language of rebranding, the pivot from entertainment to influence. A former Sirius producer even hinted that new sponsors wanted him to bring balance to the show. Balance apparently means calling black women divisive while giving Trump's rhetoric a free pass. And we can't ignore how personal he's made it. After years of avoiding Trump's name, Smith now drops casual lines about how the man did some good things. It's revisionist history dressed up as analysis. He wants the audience to think he's being fair, but what he's really doing is rehabilitating a brand. The same brand that benefits from suppressing Epstein's connections, from keeping questions about evidence destruction out of the mainstream. When Crockett called Trump a wannabe dictator and said he was hiding what the public deserves to know, Smith's show suddenly turned into a lecture about tone. The timing doesn't lie. Meanwhile, Crockett's own political star keeps rising. Every interview she gives brings more attention to the investigation, attention that corporate media would rather divert. And as that pressure builds, Smith's role in this saga starts to look less like coincidence and more like orchestration. Maybe he doesn't even realize it. Maybe he's just doing what he's always done, keeping the cameras on himself, making sure no one else controls the story. But whether by design or delusion, the outcome is the same. The scandal fades while Stephen A. trends.
And I made some noise last week because I had the temerity, the unmitigated gall, to say this about Representative Crockett when talking about the state of our politics in the midst of a government shutdown, by the way, that has unfolded since October 1st.
It's not the first time powerful media figures have played this game. We've watched networks trade integrity for ratings, and we've seen contracts shaped around silence. But what makes this one sting is how easily it weaponizes identity. Smith positions himself as the voice of the culture, the one who keeps it real, even as his silence on the biggest corruption story of the decade speaks louder than any monologue. His job isn't journalism, it's containment. Keep the audience angry enough to argue, but never informed enough to act.
Those computers weren't there anymore, so all that was scrubbed, all that was taken out. So. And part of a plea deal is you don't collect evidence. There is no evidence. When you have a plea deal, Nobody is collecting any evidence. You understand?
You can see it now, the endless cycle of noise that protects the powerful. While Crockett calls for transparency, Smith calls for manners. While Congress goes dark, Smith's studio lights stay bright. And when the next headline breaks, he'll be right there again, turning the outrage inward, making sure the only thing trending is him. We know Smith's not a journalist. We know he's not a politician, so why is he acting like Trump's cleanup crew? And more importantly, what's he helping them hide next? Could it be that the real cover-up isn't happening in Washington at all, but right here in plain sight through the voices we trust most? Tell us what you think below, because something about this story isn't adding up. Until next time, stay sharp, stay curious, and don't look away.